Some sharp-eyed viewers have noted that there is no video on my channel about villains. And there's a reason for that. Primarily because when I approach gaming in my default way, I'm not making villains. I'm just making characters. I make background characters of various types, each with their agendas and their interests, and, much the same way you make a player character. And when they're all added into the mix, some are made into villains by the choices that the characters make, or the things that the characters choose to find interesting or important or vital, and some are made villains by the biases or the viewpoints of the players. There are famous opinions about everyone hating the halflings or the gnomes or whatever, and that kind of thing. I myself, on the two times that I ventured into the classic module Ravenloft, just simply could not get along with Lady Irina, couldn't stand her, and made her my enemy. So, I don't, as a game master, spend time creating villains unless I have a very limited amount of time. A one-shot, a demo of a system, something like that, where, an arc of events is required in order to showcase the whole system. I don't tell stories and put them in front of my players to experience in my normal way of play. So in my normal way of play, as I've said, I don't create villains. But once the villain appears, what happens? Well, again, in games where you are shaping the flow of the story, the tendency is to make that villain appropriately villainous. He's been selected by events to become the focal point of the player's ire, has therefore become the antagonist to the player's protagonist, and so deserves some special treatment. But my normal way of playing is not to do this. I try to do my best to keep them as true to themselves as possible, and I, of course, have an anecdote to go along with this. This is a recent one. In my Edge of the Empire campaign, the players have spent many, many, many sessions getting in a position to take down the perceived head of an organization that was running counter to the organization to whom they are beholden. So their underworld organization was slowly and methodically being taken out by a better organized consortium of underworld individuals within their own system. And as they began to uncover this plan, and as they figured out who was responsible for it, they really began to object to some of the things that had happened to them, both as just kind of collateral damage and later on as a reaction to their meddling. And so this particular character that they identified became the villain. Became the villain to such a point that they moved from wanting to figure out who it was and cancel their plans to wanting to know who it was so they could hunt them down and kill them. So this led them through all manner of things, which will eventually be recounted in a recap. But suffice it to say that they were so caught up in this villain that they spent days talking about how they could counter the moves they expected him to make, and they planned and planned and planned all these different contingencies. And when they actually met him, they got themselves so worked out, the players broke out into a sweat. This character was becoming very real to them. They objectified the character as the villain in such a way that it became a physical thing to want to beat him. They actually develop tunnel vision. So several major plot hooks, for want of a better term, passed their way through this character, which they simply ignored to go for the kill. They had to take him out. They had to show that they were superior by killing him. And what I mean by the plot hooks is, while they were getting themselves into a position to get close to the villain, they discovered that there was social unrest on the planet. An actual slave revolt was brewing. The droids could not go anywhere without a restraining bolt, and people were not much different. And it seemed, the closer they got to the guy, that he was actually on the side of the slave uprising. Maybe that was for an ulterior motive, maybe not. But by taking him out, the slave uprising fails. This they know. They can't worry about it. Even later, they're still trying to shy away from that point. And on and on and on. Maybe this guy is not who they think he is. Maybe they're being played by someone else. Well, they get into a confrontation based on the environment they're in. They wind up in a duel. Two characters, their villain and one of the hired guns, get head-to-head in a challenge pit, which again will be described in a recap clip. And our hired gun character reveals that he has force powers, which is something about which this villain has been obsessing. And when he sees them, he steps out of the fight. He blows his cool check. He drops to his knees and begs to be taught. This whole man's life has been structured around the Force being real and never having seen it. It's used against him violently. He sees it, his weapons pulled out of his hand, flung across the arena. And he just wants this man to teach him the Force. He surrenders completely. He's willing to turn over everything in order to be taught. What do the players do? They choose to execute him. None of the other players involved, at a distance, at range, object to this. They all take it as the right thing to do. My question is, in this series of sessions, who really was the villain? And then, after they killed him, and as play wound down, as we go toward the end of the story, they begin to ask, why did he do that? They reacted to the anticlimax of him surrendering and being cut down with, what made him do that? And that question has made all the difference. And that question makes a really good villain.